Welcome in, everybody, to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio on a Thursday. We have a great show for you here on Thursday, and a returning guest that I look forward to each and every time he is on. Mark Anthony is a psychic lawyer and a psychic explorer. He's a world-renowned fourth-generation science-based evidential psychic medium who communicates with spirits. He's the author of the groundbreaking and critically acclaimed Amazon and spiritual bestsellers, The Afterlife Frequency, Evidence of Eternity, and Never Letting Go. Mark's credentials and experience are unparalleled in the paranormal world. He's an Oxford-educated trial attorney licensed to practice before the United States Supreme Court. In England, he studied mediumship at the prestigious Arthur Findlay College for the Advancement of Psychic Science. And he's just an amazing wealth of knowledge for us here on Darkness Radio. I want to bring him in now. We're going to talk about a part of the Afterlife Frequency that we didn't touch on the first time he was here. And how should we put it, Mark? We're talking about the electromagnetic soul. That's what we're talking about here today, aren't we?
We are. First off, Tim, thanks for having me on Darkness Radio. And to the Army of Darkness, thank you for your support. Thank you for tuning in to Tim and to Darkness Radio. And I always have a great time with you, Tim. The electromagnetic soul is one of the concepts, the new concepts that I'm introducing in my latest book, The Afterlife Frequency. And I'll give you a quick summary of what I mean by the electromagnetic soul.
Sure.
Since the dawn of recorded history, every spiritual leader, we're talking Hindu sages of ancient India 5,000 years ago, even the Egyptians in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and then coming forward in time through Zoroaster, through Moses, through Buddha, Jesus, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Muhammad, Gandhi, Paramahansa Yogananda, Mother Teresa, Native American spirituality. Every major belief system teaches that who and what we are is a soul, a spirit. In terms, in the field of psychology and science, it's referred to as consciousness. Mm-hmm. And that all the great belief systems teach that the soul pre-exists the body, comes into the body, and moves on after the body dies. And we know from the laws of thermodynamics and physics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. The field of neuroscience is the study of the human brain. And we know from neuroscience that the human body has an electrical field. And the most powerful electrical field in the body is in the heart, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, think about it. It's a pump. Sure. And that thing's better be running 24/7, or we're going to get to the next part of the conversation when you're on the other side. But the most complex electrical system, electrical field in the brain is in the brain, in the cerebral cortex. So I developed the term the electromagnetic soul to describe what we really are, which is pure consciousness, a soul or a spirit that is eternal electromagnetic energy.
Okay, so the first time I heard you use this term, I freaked out a little bit, and I'll tell you why. In college, in the old days of radio, before we got into these computer editing bays and we were able to do everything digitally, we had a hard system that we used of tape, okay, of magnetic tape. So electromagnetic, I'm going to focus on the second part of your statement here. In order to wipe the slate clean on either a cart, which looked like an 8-track tape, or on reel-to-reel tape, in order to wipe that slate clean, we had a debulker, okay, which was a little black box, which was really heavy, okay, and in this heavy debulker or bulker was a huge magnet.
Yes.
Okay. Now, in this magnet, you would hit this little button, and you would basically wipe the cart on it, on one side, and then you flip it over and wipe it on another while you were pressing the button, and it would make this sound as you would do this, right? I just freaked out somebody who's wearing headphones right now. And
that was pretty good, Tim. I like that. Oh, yeah, sorry. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I also use that sound effect, by the way. You're going to love this being a psychic lawyer. I got in big trouble using the cart debulker one morning from my advisor, Ajit Daniel, who worked for the BBC. And at one time, I used the cart debulker one morning to reenact how do I want to put this? I reenacted the Ted Bundy. He was executed. There you go. The execution of Ted Bundy happened when I was in college. So I reenacted it on the air as a skit for a morning show. Probably not the best thing to do when your advisor's listening. But he called me into the office and suspended me but it was a Jerry Lewis bit. So let me explain it to you here, Mark. I've explained it before.
I'm loving this. I know it's I at a public demonstration one time, I made a disparaging comment about a mass shooter by calling him a dirtbag. And someone said, "Oh, you should not engage in public judgments." It's like, Tim, you're like me. We've been in the trenches. I've been a criminal defense lawyer. I've sat across the table from somebody who was handcuffed, who was a psychopathic killer, and who looked me in the eyes and said, "If I weren't restrained, I'd slit your throat." Now, the people that go around, "Oh, you shouldn't give these judgments." It's like, what world do they live in? I'm sorry, but, Tim, you and I do not live in the unicorns and rainbow bunny world. This is the real world. And unfortunately, there are vicious people in it. There are always going to be Vladimir Putins. There are always going to be Saddam Husseins. There are always going to be Ted Bundys. Okay, so as much as I wish we lived in the Republic of Kumbaya, where we're trotting around on our unicorn and tasting the flavor of the rainbow, we are in the material world. And there are both positive and unfortunately negative energies here. But I digress. Go ahead, Tim.
So the bit was this, Mark. And I'm sitting there, I'm doing my morning show. I said, we're going to go live now to some audio. This is Ted Bundy live at his execution, and basically I hit the cart debulker and it goes, and you hear, ooh, owie, ow, 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 ow. So it was, like the little Jerry Lewis deal, and that was it, and that was the bit. I get a call on the hotline, and it's Professor Daniel, and he says, immediately after you're off the air, I want to see you in my office. So I go right to the office, Professor Daniel's office. This is what got me the suspension for 2 weeks, Mark. As I'm sitting in his office and I'm looking around and all the papers are piled up around Professor Daniel's desk, all the books in the background on his bookshelves, he says to me, "Mr. Dennis, I recognize that you have quite a bit of talent, but it is unrefined. You are like a fine piece of brass that needs to be polished." I said, "So let me get this straight. I'm a fine piece of brass that needs to be polished." He said, "Yes." I said, "Like a knob?" He said, "Yes." I said, "So you want to polish my knob?"
Oh boy.
to which he looked at me and gave me that look and said, "You're suspended for 2 weeks." Yeah. So that's how that went. And but getting back to the cart debulker. So I bring this all full circle just with a little bit of humor to bring this up. The cart debulker worked on the premise that this giant magnet takes and wipes everything magnetically clean.
Right.
Off of any magnetic surface.
Right.
Now, keep in mind, if my electromagnetic soul got near this giant magnet, you would think it would wipe me off the face of the earth. It didn't work that way. Obviously, I'm still here.
Right. Well, and I can explain.
Okay. And I'll let you hear in a second. So obviously that's not that. But the minute you say electromagnetic soul, I freaked out thinking a cart debulker could take me out, which obviously that isn't the case. But there are magnetic forces in this universe that are huge, that potentially could, you would think, disperse our souls throughout the universe. Tell me why it's our souls are made up of an energy that's so strong that we don't dissipate.
Well, it all has to do with frequency, ergo the title of the book, The Afterlife Frequency. And the reason that I chose the term the electromagnetic soul is because we know from science that everything is composed of molecules. Molecules are made of atoms. Atoms are comprised of electrons, protons, and neutrons, which are subatomic particles, yet on an even smaller level, the most basic particle that composes everything is a quantum, ergo the term quantum physics, and that's electromagnetic energy.
Okay.
And so what's fascinating is that historically science has been split into two categories: biology, the study of organic living matter, and physics, the study of energy and inorganic matter. But on the subatomic level, there's no distinction, because organic and inorganic matter is at the most basic level electromagnetic energy. And we know that everything has a frequency, a vibration. So, the microphone that we're talking, you're talking into on your end and I'm talking into on my end.
Yep.
Okay, it's made of plastic and some metal components and wires. But it's made of the same, on the subatomic level, same electromagnetic energy that you and I are made of, which is also the same electromagnetic energy that the radio waves that this show is being broadcast. I mean, when you start thinking about quantum physics and how everything is energy and energetically connected. Now, getting back to you with that magnetic device being able to wipe out the data on the old style tape, well, that would be a different frequency than the one would be with our soul. It would also be a different frequency than the one that is the radio waves that are transmitting this show, a different frequency that would be the walls in the room behind you. Because using your theory that, well, that electromagnetic energy should have wiped out everything, well, that if that were the case, then it would be destroying all the inorganic matter around you as well. So everything has a unique vibrational signature. And this is not some airy-fairy, Republic of Kumbaya, New Agey thing. This is quantum physics. And this has been firmly established by the laws of physics. And that's one of the reasons that I wrote The Afterlife Frequency, is to explain, the subtitle is The Scientific Proof of Spiritual Contact and How That Awareness Will Change Your Life. And what it is, Tim, my dad was a NASA engineer. And before that, he'd been a Navy SEAL. And when I was a little kid, Dad was my hero. I mean, I always loved my dad. And when we got older, we were friends in addition to being father and son. But when I was a little kid, and he said I was always difficult, because it was why, how, why? He said, God, you and your questions. But he loved it. He loved it. And I remember one time I was 8 years old and we were looking at the stars. And he was explaining to me, because, my daddy worked with astronauts. So I was like, wow, and he said, Mark, there's no such thing as a mystery. There are only questions for which we do not yet have an answer. And he said that if enough research, enough money is put into it, enough dedication, we can answer any question. He said it may take years, but it will be explainable through science, which, in addition to what he meant was quantum physics. So that's why I always like being on the air with you, Tim, because you always throw me these curveball questions. And that was an excellent question. By the way, I remember when I was practicing law, when I first started practicing law, the police are, they're all now using body cams, and particularly in DUI, driving under the influence arrest. And nobody should ever get behind the wheel of a car if you've had anything to drink. I mean, call a taxi, call an Uber, call a Lyft. it's $10,000 cheaper than a first DUI, and you're not going to kill anybody. Okay.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that lightly, but I remember when I first started practicing law, they were using videotapes. Now it's all digital. And there was this one attorney who won a case because the video was distorted. And there were rumors that he went to examine it in the evidence locker and exposed it to a magnet. So when you were talking about that, it brought back that memory.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's why the breathalyzer, the intoxilizer, the breath testing equipment has to be. This is different than the video and now the digital records, but it has to be in an environment where it is shielded from RFI, radio frequency interference, which radio waves are also a form of electromagnetic energy. And so on the electromagnetic spectrum, you have radio waves, gamma rays, X-rays, ultraviolet, infrared. There is a huge array of electromagnetic energy. And the only form of electromagnetic energy visible to the human eye is light. And that's why every great spiritual teacher has referred to an encounter with the divine power as light. I mean, this is a whole nother discussion, and we can get into that later on. But these are some of the things that I discussed in the Afterlife Frequency. And Tim, I have to mention that since its release, the Afterlife Frequency was released in October of 2021, and it hit bestseller status and has maintained that. It was recommended by Shirley MacLaine, film icon, spiritual legend. In her newsletter, she recommended it. And as if that wasn't enough, then I received a message from Columbia University that it had been submitted for a Pulitzer Prize. Oh, wow. So, I'm still waiting to hear from that. I mean, I'm hopeful, but it's like, wow. And then yesterday, I understand that prettyprogressive.com listed it as one of the 16 best books about faith in God. And it was number one on the list. And I'm like, oh my God. And on that list are several great writers, including the Dalai Lama, his new book.
Wow. So
I am incredibly humbled and honored at the reception that I have been receiving from the Afterlife Frequency.
As you should be. I mean, that's good company. That's for sure. That's amazing company.
Yeah, it is overwhelming, but I put I've put years of research and work into this. A lot of my colleagues, a lot of mediums, they, I've written 10 books, and they're popping out books right and left. And that's great if they do that. But with my books, I want people to be able to pick these up 20, 30 years from now and still be getting something of use out of it. And so I don't just crank out books. I take years developing my theories, my concepts. I have it peer reviewed by scientists. I mean, the Afterlife Frequency has been endorsed by some of the top NDE experts in the world and afterlife research scientists. So it's always nerve-wracking when, I give my theories to scientists and they come back and they go, yeah, this checks out. And I had a couple of them, like Dr. Kenneth Ring, Dr. Gary Schwartz, Dr. Jeffrey Long, who all said that my theories and observations coincide with almost 50 years of near-death experience research. They say it appears that what you're proposing is in alignment with what our studies have indicated. And so Dr. Gary Schwartz, I asked him to review the book, and he called me up and he said, "Can I write the foreword?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "I love the electromagnetic soul. I want to use this. Can I use this term?" And I said, "Yes." He goes, "Great. I'm going to call it the EMS." And so a number of scientists are now referring to our soul as the EMS.
Very interesting indeed. I want to ask you a brief question. about, and it was something you had said earlier in the program, and I want to clarify something here, because when we talk about collecting EVP, and we were talking earlier about that whole Kurt DeBulker thing and frequency, and you were talking about the frequency of an electromagnetic soul and what it resonates at, and we talk about how low a frequency like your average recorder will pick up. And we talk about, especially when you talk about the holy grail of recorders, that Panasonic, I believe it's an RRDR, I'm trying to remember the model number, which supposedly has really bad shielding. And that's the reason why it picks up such great EVP, because of the flawed shielding. I'm wondering, is it because of that? Is it because of the flawed shielding and the fact that this electromagnetic soul has to turn itself down in frequency to match the recorder? What exactly is going on in your theory that this soul has to match a vibration to get to an RF frequency to create a voice? What happens in that scenario to create an EVP?
You're going to have to indulge me on a bit of a story here.
Okay.
This story is not in the book, but this is one of the reasons that I wrote the book. The best friend I ever had, his name was Billy, and we grew up together. We met when we were 11 years old, went to junior high, high school, college together. And after college, I went to law school, and then he went to Asia, and he learned how, and who knew that Billy was a linguistics genius? I mean, he learned how to speak Japanese, Cantonese, Thai, and Indonesian.
Okay.
And I mean, so he was teaching Japanese executives American conversational English in Tokyo. And so we had a bunch of adventures together because I went to go visit him in Asia. In fact, the Afterlife Frequency Chapter 1 is one of our very harrowing experiences in Asia. And the thing about Billy, even though we had both been raised in the Catholic faith, he was an atheist. And I, of course, argued the other side, if you will. And he used to say to me, and we had this ongoing debate our entire lives. It wasn't an argument. It was an intellectual debate. And he used to say, he goes, I just don't understand how you do the psychic thing. He said, because I don't believe in an afterlife. I don't believe that it's possible that we live beyond this life. And I don't believe if we could, that you can communicate with spirits. He said, but I don't know how you do this. And he said, and there's no science or technology to support this, to tune into this. Well, long story short, one of the greatest days of my life, when I look back, is he asked me to perform his wedding ceremony. He met this really wonderful woman in Japan, and I'll never forget it. They had their wedding overlooking the ocean, and everybody that mattered to me in my life was there. My parents were there, his parents, all of our friends from high school and college. I mean, everybody I loved was there, Tim. And that was just one of those shining stars in life. And then about 2 years after that, for various reasons, and I'll respect his privacy, he fell to suicide. And naturally, I was devastated. Well, a year and a half after that, I was at the Stanley Hotel, actually at a darkness radio paranormal convention. Had to be, I think, like 12 years ago. Okay. Mm-hmm. And my first book, Never Letting Go, had just come out. And I had just done my presentation. And I remember you were there and Dave was there. And I remember eating cherry pie with Dave and his mom. Okay. Right. We were all eating cherry. There was this place that sells like the best cherry pie right outside of Estes Park. And I bought a bunch of them and brought them back. And so we're all eating cherry pie. But I'm there signing books.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody, about the paranormal investigators were displaying and selling their equipment. And my manager, Rocky, and you know Rocky, you've met her a couple times.
Yep.
She was walking around checking out the equipment, and she was walking by Chris's table. It was Chris Fleming's table.
Yep.
And he was showing the spirit box, and she's walking by, and all of a sudden she hears, "Get Mark." And she stops and she's looking at this thing, and Chris is looking at it. And all of a sudden they hear, "Get Mark." And he goes, "Do you think he means you're Mark Anthony?" So all of a sudden I hear, "Mark, Mark." And I look up, and Chris and Rocky are waving, "Get over here, get over here." So I'm like, what's going on? And all these people are like crowding around the table, and I run up to it and I hear, "Bro." And then I hear, "Dude, love you, bro." Tim, I almost collapsed because I looked at Rocky. Tears are coming out of her eyes. She goes, "Mark, that was Billy's voice," because she knew him too.
Mm-hmm.
It was his voice coming out of that. Now, as a medium, I'm the one that's usually delivering messages, which, surprise people, because, that's people don't expect this to be real until they discover that it is.
Right.
And I was overcome with emotion. And then I began to think about it afterwards. And then it dawned on me, this was no coincidence, because I don't believe in coincidences. This is what I call spiritual synchronicity, another term that I discussed in the Afterlife Frequency. And then it made a whole lot of sense to me. So the atheist decided to contact me through technology. The atheist who told me there is no technology that can communicate with spirits. And it got my wheels thinking. And it started me on the very long road to developing these concepts, doing this research, and writing this book. And the reason I told you the story is to answer your question. It's about the frequency. See, everything has a vibration and a frequency. Mm-hmm. And so our electromagnetic soul, we have 5 different brainwave frequencies: gamma, beta, alpha, theta, and delta. Gamma is the super high functioning. That's, Matt Amodio, Amy Schneider, Ken Jennings on Jeopardy. Yep. That's going at ultra high frequency. Beta is what we're in right now, the normal everyday awake state. Alpha is both meditative, and as you begin to relax and go into dream, the relaxed state. Theta is dream sleep. Delta is very deep sleep, where there's no dream activity, but your body's healing itself. And it's on the alpha theta border where psychic and mediumistic activity occur. It's also on the alpha theta border where people receive visitations in the dream state. And so what a spirit does is they're at an ultra high frequency. They're in the afterlife frequency. And so what the spirit does is they bring their vibrational frequency down to align with our brainwave frequency, and ergo, that frequency match is spirit communication. And of course, Billy took the easy route and aligned his frequency with a device which was scanning EM frequencies, looking for spirit voices. And I've got a lot more to say about that in the book, and I explain, why people have visitations in dreams and why that's so popular, because the alpha theta border is a natural progression of what happens to us when we're sleeping. Now, what we who study this phenomena do not yet understand is why people like me can go to the alpha theta border within seconds, when normally it takes hours to get there in a relaxed state. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It gets me to where I was wanting to go with that point. I wonder, though, as a soul, if we have the ability, and I'll follow up with this question and then we'll get closer to our break time here. As a soul, do we have the ability to develop that ability to grow, so to speak. So as it is right now, let's say your friend, the atheist, if he wanted to in this life graduate above that ability to maybe contact somebody on the other side by the end of his life, if he decides, I don't want to be an atheist anymore, I've decided I want to grow spiritually. I've decided I want to believe in something, whether it be, the flying spaghetti monster, Jesus, Buddha, or whatever. I'm going to expand my mind. At this point, do I then, as a soul, graduate to a point where when I pass, rather than communicating with you through a spirit box, maybe I can reach out to you in a dream, or maybe I can reach out to you psychically, or is there room for growth, so to speak?
It appears that growth of the soul, or rather development, elevation of frequency, is part of what they do. But based on the 15,000 plus readings that I've done in my life, a spirit, an electromagnetic soul, is capable of communication right at the point of death. And I know that I depart with a lot of the paranormal investigators. Oh, there's souls that are trapped and all that. And it's like, you can't suppress energy. Now, we can talk about the various schools of thought on hauntings, but a lot of times that's residual energy echoes. It's like, if there's an area where a trauma has occurred, the vibration of that event is there, and that people who are predisposed or sensitive or receptive psychically are going to pick up on that. But in most cases, that's no more a sentient spirit than your reflection in a mirror is you. Okay, and you're picking up on that. And spirits, once they're out of the body, they're no longer limited by physical or mental disabilities or impairments. Spirits are pure energy. Energy doesn't get sick, old, tired, or die. It moves at the speed of light. And that's why they're able to transition from their frequency to ours so quickly. The other side isn't orbiting, the star Betelgeuse 100 light years away. It is a frequency, a dimension which runs parallel to ours. And people say, well, that sounds like, like really out there, man. All right, well, AM radio versus FM radio. There we have two completely different energetic systems that are designed for the transmission and communication of information. And what separates them is frequency and amplitude. And so AM is on one, it's a lower frequency. FM is a higher frequency, but occasionally you will get an overlap of the frequencies, and that is that's mediumship. That's a visitation in a dream. That's what happens during a near-death experience. That's what happens during a deathbed vision. That's what happens during a shared death experience. It's all about frequency alignment and overlap of frequency between our material world dimension and the afterlife frequency of the other side dimension.
Okay. When we come back, there's a news story that I read yesterday with Mally Fox and Supernatural News talking about the first ever recording of the moment when someone dies and if our life really does flash before our eyes and the physical part of that. And we're going to talk to Mark about the physical part of dying and how it relates to the electromagnetic soul. That's coming up here after the break, right here on the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. Our guest is psychic lawyer Mark Anthony, and we'll talk about the Afterlife Frequency coming up next here on Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. This is Darkness Radio on a Thursday. I'm Tim Dennis. With us is psychic lawyer Mark Anthony, and talking a little bit about it's an offshoot of the Afterlife Frequency. That's what I meant to say, Mark. Mark Anthony is with us, and we are talking about the electromagnetic soul. And there was an article that had come out this past week, Mark. We read it yesterday on Supernatural News, and if you'll indulge me here for just a moment. It says the first ever recording of a dying brain has revealed we might relive some of our best memories in our last moments. Scientists accidentally captured our most complex organ as it shut down, showing an astonishing snapshot into death. A patient was treated for epilepsy, hooked up to an EEG. The 87-year-old man's brain activity was being measured when he suddenly had a heart attack and died. This meant the 15 minutes around his death was recorded on the EEG. In the 30 seconds either side of the patient's final heartbeat, an increase in very specific brain waves was spotted. These waves, known as gamma oscillations, are linked into things like memory retrieval, meditation, and dreaming. This could mean, although many more studies would need to take place, we might see a sort of film reel of our best memories as we die. The parts of the brain that were activated in this study also suggest we could enter a peaceful, dreamlike state that feels similar to meditation. Amazingly, as our bodies shut down, our brains could still be working hard in a concerted effort to deliver on a final task that makes the process feel less bleak. Dr. Ajmal Zemmar, a neurosurgeon at the University of Louisville, Zemmar, who organized the study, said, through generating oscillations involved in memory retrieval, the brain may be playing a last recall of important life events just before we die, similar to the ones reported in near-death experiences. These findings challenge our understanding of when exactly life ends and generate important subsequent questions, such as those related to the timing of organ donation. Similar brainwave changes have been seen in rats at the time of death, but never in humans before, according to the different studies that have been done. So, Mark, how does this connect necessarily to the electromagnetic soul, and what is it exactly that the scientists have found with this particular study in this person who had epilepsy?
Well, first off, this is a groundbreaking discovery, and a discovery by accident. This is the first time in medical science that a person's brain was being monitored by an EEG, an electroencephalogram. There's that electro again. Encephalogram when they died. And what had happened is there was an 87-year-old man, and he fell, and he was having epileptic seizures. And so he was in Tartu, Estonia, and it was Dr. Raul Vicente. They had him on an EEG, and they were monitoring his brain when he had a heart attack and died. And so the EEG continued to record his brainwave activity. And what's fascinating, as what you read, there was enhanced brainwave activity of gamma. Remember the gamma oscillations. Remember I was explaining the 5 different forms of brainwave activity, and gamma is the ultra high frequency, but also what kicked in were the alpha, theta, the beta, alpha, theta, and delta waves as well. Now, it would be easy for the skeptics to say that, okay, so people that have an NDE, this happens, they do a replay of their life, they have what's known as the life review, and maybe there's some type of spiritual component to it. But this is the first time in human history that we've ever seen that, and this ties into my theory. This was actually a paper entitled Enhanced Interplay of Neuronal Coherence and Coupling in the Dying Human Brain. And it was published in February of 2022 in Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience, which is a publication.
Yep.
So basically what was going on here is 87-year-old man having seizures. He's getting monitored through an EEG, has a heart attack, and dies. And there is a complete record of accelerated brainwave activity. Now, there have been studies with rats that have been hooked up to EEGs as they're dying, and there is a consistency in other species, meaning rats, of enhanced brainwave activity prior to passing. So the question is a near-death experience, is it just a function of the dying brain? Au contraire, it is not. And let me explain why.
Okay.
What about a shared death experience? Okay, a near-death experience has been criticized for being subjective. A person has it. But in a shared death experience, more than one person experiences the same event. What we're seeing this in a lot is someone who is terminally ill and they're dying, and prior to passing, they start to talk to and interact with spirits of their loved ones who've passed. And I think a very recent and maybe one of the most famous examples of a deathbed vision, well, there's a couple that I could talk about, is George Floyd.
Yeah.
As he was pinned by that officer, just moments before he died, he said, "Mama, I'm through." And his mother, whom he was extremely close to, had passed.
Mm-hmm.
More recently, Betty White, the love of her life was Alan Ludden. I mean, these two were soulmates. He died back in 1981 or 80, I think 83, I think it was. She lives another 41 years.
Right.
So here she is, two weeks shy of her 100th birthday. And according to her assistant who was with her, before she died, she looked up and said, "Alan." Okay. Now, that may be considered subjective experiences, except that these are two of the most heavily documented deathbed visions. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple computers, before he died, they said he looked up and said, "Oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow," as if he was reacting to what he was seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So now, these have been reported for centuries, but it becomes a shared death experience when people who are in close physical proximity to somebody who's dying, could be family members and close friends, hospice workers, healthcare workers. I've been part of these on a number of occasions. Families ask me to be there when their loved one is dying. And I start picking up on the spirits. But let's take me out of the equation here. Let's just put non-mediums. So somebody is dying, and then the people around them start to see spirits. They see the spirits that the person who's dying is having in their deathbed vision. So now this goes from being a deathbed vision to a shared death experience. Then at the time of death, and I've witnessed this, people see a surge of light come out of the person's body. Sometimes they actually see a transparent replica of that person emerging from their body. They will feel dizzy and lifted off their feet. They may hear indescribably beautiful music. And in many instances, they will see scenes from that person's life. They get caught up in the life review. Now, this is being documented by doctors, by scientists all over the world. So how is this possible? Well, the electromagnetic soul is the explanation for this. And here's why. Tim, I know you're an electrical kind of guy. I mean, you've been in radio for years.
Yep.
An incandescent light bulb, ever seen it get real bright before it goes out? Boom.
Yep.
We've all seen that. Well, why is that? Why does a light bulb that is bad, that is failing, suddenly get very bright before popping? Well, in the filament of the light bulb is the metal tungsten. And the purpose of the tungsten is to regulate the voltage that normally goes through the light bulb. And when the tungsten decays, it is no longer able to manage and regulate the amount of electricity. So before complete failure, there's this surge of energy. Let's go to the human brain. As a human brain is deteriorating and no longer able to hold and regulate that amount of energy, aka the electromagnetic soul, the EMS, there is a surge of activity, brainwave activity. Now, we've seen this in people with Alzheimer's, brain cancer, severe head injury, all types of impairments of the brain, where people who have been completely non-responsive just before death wake up and are coherent and talk to people and say, "Oh, thank you, I love you." And one thing neuroscientists agree on is you don't grow a billion new brain cells right before death. Mm-hmm. So when somebody is dying and there's this surge as their electromagnetic soul is beginning to separate from the hard drive, the brain, the EMS frequency of the dying person interfaces with the EMS, the electromagnetic souls of the people around them. So they get caught up in this frequency overlap in the transition of a person's EMS from our dimension to the other side. And that's why they will see the spirit of the person as they leave. They will see spirits that are interacting with the person dying. They will feel lifted off of their feet because they're going into that alpha state. So that is what is happening in a shared death experience in a deathbed vision. And that is what I believe this study, this accidental study from Estonia caught when this was the first time on record that a person was being monitored by an EEG as they died.
Interesting. What keeps now when you see that shared death experience, what keeps other electromagnetic souls from answering that call, so to speak? You have one that's going to its death experience or crossing over, for lack of a better term, because that's what we know it as.
Yeah.
What's keeping other souls from answering that call?
What do you mean other souls from answering the call?
Well, you have those other souls seeing other spirits. You have those other souls hearing that music. You have other souls.
You mean the bystanders? The
bystanders, exactly.
Yeah. Well, because they're not dying. They're not dying. See, we all have the same physiological equipment, and behind the center of our forehead, about 4 inches or so, is the pineal gland. It's between the size of a grain of rice and maybe a lima bean, and it controls our brainwave frequencies, our circadian rhythms. I mean, our perception of light. And we get back to light again. Mm-hmm. And also, according to various studies in Britain, Germany, France, and Israel, it contains calcite and magnetite crystals. So basically, we have a radio station in our head. Because and you're a radio guy.
Yep.
Okay. The earliest radios were quartz crystal with copper wire running low levels of electricity through it. Well, we have that in our head, albeit much more sophisticated. Mm-hmm. And so the people that are in close proximity, their pineal glands, their electromagnetic souls, their radio stations in their heads start getting the frequency overlap. And that's why they get caught up in a person's death experience. Okay. And that's why it becomes a shared death experience. It's really a fascinating field of study. And that's why I wrote about it so extensively in the Afterlife Frequency, because, see, the critics of things like the electromagnetic soul and the critics of near-death experiences, they get into, well, it's subjective. And one of the biggest attacks is that one of the side effects of a dying brain, of a dying pineal gland, is to produce dimethyltryptamine, DMT. Mm-hmm. Dimethyltryptamine, DMT, is a natural hallucinogenic, and it can be artificially recreated. And so if you take DMT, basically it's like an LSD trip. There's a feeling of floating. There's a spiritual component to it. So critics and skeptics say, okay, well, basically it's just the side effect of a dying brain. Well, here's what DMT does not do. It doesn't give you the sense of going through a tunnel. It doesn't give you the sense of encountering your deceased loved ones. It doesn't give you the sense of encountering God. It also doesn't give you veridical perception of things around your body. And here's what I mean by that. On a couple different, several occasions, there was a woman in Japan. This is one example. She died, had an NDE, and came out of it. Her parents were there, and she said, "This is so strange. I saw my sister. But that could not be, for she is alive." And her parents began to cry and say, "Well, she was killed in a car accident yesterday and you didn't know it." Now, how does DMT get her to see her sister who didn't die? Here's another, this is one of hundreds, if not thousands of accounts. Woman's on an operating table. She dies during surgery. She's hovering above the operating table. And she notices as she goes past the light fixture that the light fixture is very dusty on the top, and she needs to report this. And then she goes, "Wait a second, why am I seeing this?" Next thing she knows, she's hovering above the hospital, and she sees in the rain gutter a blue sneaker stuck in the rain gutter. Well, meanwhile, back in the operating room, they're working on her, and they bring her back. And she begins to tell them about this when she comes out of it. So the surgeon said, get 2 people up on the roof right now. Exactly where she said it was, there was a blue sneaker in a rain gutter. I ask you, how does a dying brain, dimethyltryptamine, recreate that? It doesn't. Right. And that's because people are confusing the human brain with the electromagnetic soul. The human brain is like a computer hard drive, Tim, and it no more creates your electromagnetic soul than your computer hard drive created Windows 10 or now Windows 11. Okay. And so when the hard drive crashes, who and what we are gets uploaded to the cloud.
Mm-hmm. So clear this up for me then. As we read this article, it said that, or it's trying to attribute, at least as far as I can tell, it's trying to attribute the life reveal to a physical function in the brain, not necessarily what we've been attributing to a spiritual experience the entire time. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, you got to realize that they're not jumping to any conclusions here. What they're saying is, and they also don't know what this person experienced because he died.
Right.
Okay. They didn't get to revive him. So what they could have been measuring is this enhanced activity, which was the electromagnetic soul, like the tungsten in a light bulb burning out, this enhanced activity of the EMS basically disconnecting and quantum leaping to the other side dimension. And that's what I believe they saw. Now, the only way to get more studies on this is to get more studies on this. And you're going to have to start asking people and families that, while they're dying, can we hook them up to an EEG? I mean, there's a lot of issues there. Yeah. But I'm very fascinated by this. To me, this is perhaps the first empirical evidence of the EMS.
Yeah, without a doubt. You're right. It does kind of raise some ethical issues. I mean, and maybe some, I shouldn't say ethical issues, but it raises some moral issues with families. I mean, families that I guess wouldn't have come to the conclusion that they're going to lose a loved one, I guess could say, well, we're going to lose them anyways. In cases where you have, patients that are dealing with long-term illnesses and things like that, it could be looked at as advancing a cause.
It could be. And there's also the expense of doing it, because EEGs are not inexpensive. Right. But if it was part of a full-on study, I mean, it's like people who donate their bodies to science and also do organ donation. I think that if you know that you're dying and they ask you, do you mind if we monitor your brain when you're dying? And it's the wish, the intent of the person who's dying. I think, as long as it's handled in a very diplomatic and sincere way and compassionate way with the family, I think that there should be more studies along this line. But there's a lot of people who would not want this to happen to them or to their loved one, and their wishes need to be, and their privacy needs to be respected as well.
You brought up something earlier, speaking of ethical and moral, that I do want to revisit with you here, and that had to do with when it comes to the electromagnetic soul, spirits being trapped here on Earth, especially when we're investigating. I think it's always been with paranormal investigation, it's been assumed that when we go into a spot like a prison or like even like say the Washoe Club in Reno, that when we walk in there are these, I don't want to say damned souls that are stuck on this plane, but there are active hauntings of these souls that are stuck here, and that we have this kind of grandiose misgivings that we're going to walk in there and we're going to free these souls and we're going to send them onto the light. You mentioned something in there that intrigued me, that they're no more trapped there than we assume that they are, that we're really just kind of looking at a mirror image of that soul, that they're really not there.
Right.
Let's expound on that a little bit, because I've always assumed that when we're getting intelligent responses to something that we think is earthbound, that we really are communicating with something that's there.
Well, there's three schools of thought on this. Number one is that they're there, they're trapped there. And I don't subscribe to that one, because spirits are pure energy. And once again, they move at the speed of light. And as soon as you're out of your body, you're a spirit. There's people, they wander there. It's like, yeah. Number two is that it's a residual energy echo. And that is where matter retains vibration. And so particularly at a place like Gettysburg, the place in Reno, that terrible, horrible things happened there. I mean, I experienced this at Dachau concentration camp in Germany. I experienced this at Ground Zero. I mean, I could go on and on with the places. And then the third school of thought is that the spirits have transitioned to the other side, but they return to a particular location. Now, why would they do that? And that may be a lot of times what you're investigating. And, we also have to think that, they're trapped there. No, they're not. Moving at the speed of light. By the time it took me to say this, a spirit could have been back and forth to the moon about 5 times. All right, that because the moon's roughly 250,000 miles away, and light travels at 186,282 miles per second. So they may pop back and forth to a particular location, especially if there's people there investigating the trauma that led to their death, and they pick up on it and go, let's check it out. And they're going to go in and see this. So does anyone have all the answers? No. And I think that that's why it's important for people like you, Tim, to continue doing the paranormal investigations. But I've been to many locations where there have been brutal murders, horrific military battles, and I've picked up on things, but it seemed to me to be more of a residual energy echo than it did a sentient spirit. And look at it from the spirit's perspective. Do you want to hang out in a garbage dump, or would you rather go to Maui?
Well, I'd rather go to Maui.
Well, yeah. I think I'll hang out in this cold, isolated prison cell where I died horribly, or I could go into the light. Well,
let me counter with this then, Mark, because in a lot of these, like, let's say prisons, let's bring up a prison, for example, we will bring up a prison, for example. You go into some of these prisons or some of these like penitentiaries, and you have people that are getting their hair pulled, they're getting scratched, they're getting things that are not only just contact, but malevolent contact. Where is that coming from? If these aren't active hauntings, if this isn't an active soul or electromagnetic soul that's dealing with them, then what is it that's scratching them?
That's an interesting question. And that could also be the negative residual energy that they're picking up on. And also, people tend to jump to conclusions. It's like you walk into a place, you get cold chills and tingles. Well, when I feel that, I realize that that's the spirit trying to connect with me, but it's also the physiological sensation involved with the flight or fight response. So a lot of people is like, I'm getting my hair pulled, I'm getting this. Well, maybe that's what happened to the person there that died. And what you have to do is envision a beam of white light coming through you and emanating, first coming into you and through you, and then reflecting out, and you put that negative energy at bay. That's always been because I've had people like, there's a boogeyman, and I'm like, envision the white light. And then all of a sudden they go, it's gone. What did you do? I said, I didn't do anything. It's like, that's the power of the divine, and you adjust your frequency to that.
So I'm going to ask the question, I guess, that is the burning question of of everyone in religious dogma and whatnot, is there a negative side to the electromagnetic soul? In other words, is there punishment on the other side if once we transition?
Yes, it's called reincarnation. And you come right back here. And we could do a whole show on reincarnation. That's one of the topics that I lecture on and that I write on. But as far as the archetypal hell, hell is, and this is a whole chapter in the Afterlife Frequency. There's a chapter entitled "There's No Place Like Hell," and I explain how hell is a myth, a metaphor, and unfortunately very real. But I'm not going to spill the beans because people need to read that because because it's very important. I was raised Catholic, and in that belief system, there is definitely a hell. But see, we have an out. We have purgatory. Purgatory is like cosmic probation, and so you're not bad enough to go to hell, but you're not quite good enough to go to heaven. So you go to purgatory, where you're not suffering as bad as you are in hell. You're just sort of miserable. And then when that's done, you go to heaven. And I don't, and I know some people will take offense, but many belief systems have different levels to their view of the afterlife. In fact, in Scripture, there are three heavens. The first heaven is the sky. The second heaven is the realm of the stars. The third heaven is the abode of God. Islam has 7 different levels to heaven. The Mormon religion, the LDS Church, has 3 different levels to heaven. So this is not an unusual concept. Hindus, Buddhists, they all have different. And what are those? What's another name for those levels? Is frequency. So if we look at it through the filter of quantum physics, which I try to do, and in which I write about, then a lot of these belief systems, these were people who were experiencing these phenomenon and trying to explain them in the vernacular and of the day. For example, Moses encountering the bush that burned, yet it did not burn. So if you lived in the Bronze Age, 1300 BC, like Moses, and you're encountering the divine, which is a highly concentrated form of electromagnetic energy, how would you describe it? In those terms, the most powerful form of energy you would know would be fire. So you would describe it was a fire. It was like a fire, but it didn't burn the bush. Similarly, there's the Pentecost in the New Testament, where after Jesus has ascended and his disciples and Mother Mary, the Holy Spirit appears in a tongue of fire above everybody. Now, when you study auras, which is the energy field around people, a light bulb has an aura. Anything with an energy field has an aura. But the crown chakra, the one on the top, flickers, moves around. How would you describe that in the Iron Age? Well, it looked like a tongue of fire. So throughout the millennia, the different belief systems, and the Buddhists and the Hindus and all of them, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, you look at the depictions, halos, a halo, okay?
Yep.
That's an aura. That's an aura. And it's not just in Christianity. There's Buddhist and Hindu artwork that depict people having, or the Egyptians, big time. They always had that cool round disc with the horns and stuff coming out of it. And so this phenomenon has been observed through centuries. It's just that now we have the science that can explain it.
Very true. Kind of blew my mind there a little bit, Mark. Not going to lie. So
thanks, Tim.
Coming
from you, that is a huge compliment. Thank you, Tim.
Well, now you got me thinking about chakra systems and whether different religions are actually acknowledging chakra systems at the same time without.
Well, sure they are. Saint Teresa of Avila, the first woman to be elevated to the rank of doctor of the church, wrote about the 7 mansions within. Now, we have 7 chakras
Yep.
in our body. And what's fascinating about the chakras is the location of the chakras all align with the 7 different endocrine glands in our body. And somehow or other, the Hindus figured this out. But people say, well, how have they figured it out then? Well, it's not like human beings weren't any less clever or any less spiritually sensitive then. And they observed things and they began to make notations. And now, we notice that the 7 endocrine glands in our body, which, the pineal gland, the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, the heart, that's near the heart, the pancreas, the solar plexus, the reproductive areas, all these different endocrine glands, they have both chemical and electrical impulses. And once again, we're getting back to energy centers within the body. Because I hear a lot of people say, oh, all that new agey stuff with the chakras. And I remember seeing how acupuncture was looked at as voodoo medicine, but now there are insurance companies who will actually pay for acupuncture treatment, which makes sense because acupuncture is predicated on opening up energy channels in the body. Well, sometimes those blockages are due to histamines. Histamines are a fluid that your body produces, which cause inflammation. And when you hit the right point, it disperses the histamine. It brings down the inflammation. The inflammation is no longer pressing on nerves and other soft tissue. And voila, the pain goes away.
Yep.
So there is a scientific basis for these things.
You just got me thinking about different experiments and even in the most basic experiments in school, when you first start doing science experiments with the energy out of a potato and things like that, how you can pull energy out of different things. And I think about one of the gifts I got recently. Hempvana has they have like a little TENS unit, but the only way the TENS unit works, you can put a AA battery in it, but the only way it works is if there is you have to make the connection yourself. So like I have a frozen shoulder right now. My left shoulder is frozen, but the only way to get it unfrozen was to take, and it looks weird because it's in the form of a rocket ship. It looks like a double entendre for something else that's kind of naughty, Mark. But it's got this double prong thing on. I know it sounds so bad when I describe it. On the other end of the rocket ship that actually is the electrode for this TENS unit. Okay. But the only way it makes a connection is if it has contact with your bare hand or your bare skin. So if you try to put a glove on and try to use the TENS unit, it doesn't work. So you have to make a connection with your own body. It's your own electromagnetic soul, I guess. But it's your own electromagnetic impulses that you're sending out through your body that create the chain in order to create the TENS unit pulses. So without your own electrical system in your body, you can't create the chain to make the TENS unit work, which is kind of interesting that you're using your own juice, so to speak, to make this TENS unit work, which nobody else can use it on you then. I don't know how you get to use it on your mid back or whatever, but I was able to use it to help unfreeze my shoulder. It's a long story made even longer, but it gets you thinking about things like that the body is a wonderful system in that you just can't, when you're talking about, the areas of the body that create things chemically and electrically, you do have two different things that come out of a system, like your heart. There's a chemical and electrical version to that. There's, to every organ in the body, there's a chemical and electrical function
right.
to that system.
Right. And, you brought up an interesting point with the TENS unit. It appears that one of the great advances in medical science in the 21st century will be vibrational energy healing. because studies have shown that disease cells have a lower frequency than healthy cells. So TENS unit is an electrostimulation. So let's say that there's I'm just saying this, this is strictly a hypothesis. Let's say a cancer cell has a lower vibration. So instead of, subjecting people to radiation, all that, if there was some other form of maybe laser or other type of energy stimulation that could raise the vibration of that cell and bring it back into a state of optimal health. So there's a lot of discussion, and as far as I understand, a lot of research going into this. So it's just, let's hope that these things are indeed possible, which I believe that they are.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as the electromagnetic soul goes, now you said hell is basically reincarnation. Does that leave us much hope then? I want to look at things from an optimistic standpoint.
Sure.
The idea is that with reincarnation, that's supposed to be a soul growth, not soul punishment. And I guess, Mark, from some religious dogma, reincarnation is supposed to be the idea that we go through this and we grow to a point where eventually we've come to, I guess, a pinnacle, a point where we've achieved what we need to achieve.
In this dimension, where we don't have to come back in this dimension.
Right. So is that still the idea behind this?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, we come into this incarnation and go through, people say, well, there's more people alive today than have ever been on Earth. And so, well, that's also assuming Earth is a closed system and we're not receiving a flow of new souls all the time, because the dinosaurs had to go somewhere. All right. So, Earth is not a closed system, and but let's save the reincarnation for another show.
Okay,
because there's a lot we can discuss about that.
Can we tackle that just real quick? Where are these new souls coming from?
Well, I've asked. I always want to ask. Spirits, and what they say is they're quantum leaping from other dimensions.
Okay.
And they're coming here. And then when we're done here, then we move on. And because I was like, well, wait. I want the Michelangelo painting. I want to go to heaven. I want to hang out with some angels and Jesus and Archangel Michael and, see all that. And I got the distinct impression that they were kind of laughing at me. And the response was, energy is eternal. And why do you worry of such things? I said, but don't you get to be with God? They say you always are.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what about the multiple people who claim they've been somebody famous? Is it a matter of a splinter soul, that one soul splinters into many people, or is it just somebody who's thinking they remember they were somebody and they weren't?
That's hilarious, because there is this woman who lived in Egypt. Her name was Louise Eddy, and she was born around 1904. And as a child, she started talking about ancient Egypt, and that she lived in the court of Seti, I think Seti the second. And anyway, she went to Egypt as a teenager, and she started working with these archaeologists. And she said, around the temple of Seti, and she said, well, there used to be an orchard over there, and there was an irrigation system over here. And they found it exactly where she said that it was. And what was really amazing is within a year of her being there, she learned how to not only read Egyptian hieroglyphs, but also how to speak, or at least give a pronunciation of the ancient Egyptian language. She died back in 1988, and she was revered as a holy woman by the Egyptians, because she used to talk with such authority and reverence about ancient Egypt. And she said something which always cracks me up. She said, everybody comes to Egypt in search of a prior life. You have no idea how many Cleopatras I've met.
It's true. Nobody ever says I was the garbage man in ancient Egypt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So maybe you worked at Cleopatra's Palace cleaning out the toilets, I mean, yeah, because everyone thinks, oh, it just, and when I've met so many of these so-called psychics, oh, in a prior life, you were St. Peter and you were Mary Magdalene and you were, it's like, I'm always very, very cautious when I see people who are doling out, fame and fortune to everybody. I think the more authentic accounts of reincarnation are people who give a description of like Om Seti. She said she was in the court of Seti, but she was, just somebody that worked there. And other people who say that, oh, I lived at this, but they had a very nondescript life. And then they can find verifiable facts that correlate with the prior life. But to come and say, oh, I was Julius Caesar. And, I've encountered a number of people who say things like, I met somebody that there's this, I don't know what she is. I won't even use the word psychic, convinced this guy and his friend that he was St. Peter and that she was Mary Magdalene. And it's like, okay. but hey, maybe they were, maybe they were. Know. But the thing is, when approaching these, and that's what I do with the Afterlife Frequency, you have to keep the scientific method in mind. Okay. It is entirely possible that man was St. Peter and Mary Magdalene, and his friend was Mary Magdalene, but we need verifiable facts and evidence.
Right.
And that's what I, liked about being an attorney. You just can't come in and say, I am innocent or I am guilty. You have to have the facts and evidence to prove someone's guilt. And you can have a hypothesis, and a scientific hypothesis of today often becomes a scientific fact of tomorrow. So I want to leave it at that.
Okay, I got to ask you this one question though, Mark. Honestly, if you're sitting there and in the psychic part of psychic lawyer, let's say I come to you and I say, and I'm getting a reading from you, and I say, Mark, someone told me in a past life I was my 18th great grandfather. Okay, and do you have something in your head that just goes off and says, well, that's a load of bullshit? And you can look at me and say, well, no, Tim, you know what they told you was a load of bullshit. Can you just honestly look into my Akashic records or whatever, or my past lives, and just say, nope, sorry, buddy, I don't see it? Or yeah, there's some truth to it. Is there anything that backs that up?
Well, as an evidential medium, what I focus on is communication with loved ones connected to you who've been passed, who can be verified by the pieces of evidence that they transmit. I could sit there all day long and say, oh, you were the Apostle Peter, or you were Julius Caesar, or you were Napoleon, but there's no way to substantiate that. So what I focus on is spirits that communicate to me verifiable facts and evidence. And what's really cool is when they bring up stuff that the person doesn't know, and then they ask relatives and go, oh, well, that was Aunt Martha, and they get the validation. Or when spirits give me information on things that have not yet happened.
Okay.
And that's also ties into the electromagnetic soul theory, because on the subatomic level, time as we know it doesn't exist. It's all occurring simultaneously. So that's why spirits can pick up on future events. But I don't engage in these readings where I tell people that you're the reincarnation of this or that, because I'm an evidential medium. That is my gift, and that is what I focus on.
Okay, that's fair enough. That makes sense. So when it comes to this electromagnetic soul, and we've kind of know where our fate is, let me ask you this. What should we expect that heaven or the afterlife is? We all have our idea based on our dogma and what we've learned in school or catechism or Sunday school or whatever it is we went through, or our religious training. But what are we to expect now that we have this new frontier? What should we, now that we're energy, what do we expect the afterlife to be?
As it's been explained to me by spirits thousands of times, they pretty much come down to this. You can't even begin to understand what it's like, because we are designed for finite perception and they're infinite beings. And, they're moving at light speed, but they have on a couple occasions allowed me to feel what it's like, but I can only handle it for a few seconds. It's like I'm a wire that's suddenly trying to channel all the energy going through Manhattan. Oh, wow. And it's an overload and it's exhausting. But Tim, it is the most incredible sensation. I feel that I'm part of everything. There's no physical or mental pain or stress. It's this absolute sense of interconnectedness. Physically, it's like if you're in like a swimming pool or the ocean and the water's that perfect warm temperature, and you go underwater and you just sort of float there, like, you're underwater, but you're hovering, and you don't feel anything on your body. And it's just amazing, but it's a million times more amazing than that. Now, when I say these things, for our listeners who may be very unhappy and sad with their life, and there's a reason that I'm bringing all this up, is I am in no way encouraging anyone to cut their lives short. Because my best friend Billy perished from suicide. So if you are depressed and you are sad, and you're hearing Tim and I talk about how wonderful the other side is, you also have to realize that we are here in the material world for a reason. And every day that we're alive is a gift, even though many days may not feel that way. And if you are feeling isolated and alone, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. There are trained professionals who care, who are going to help you through this. 1-800-273-8255.
That's a wonderful message. I appreciate you putting that out there, Mark. And it's absolutely true. You are somebody's treasure. You are somebody's reason for being here, even though it may not feel like you are. You make waves in this world and you make a difference. And you need to remember that even when you're at your lowest. So that's one thing that you need to remember as well. Mark, I guess in closing, I want to thank you for being here for Darkness Radio and for being here for our listeners. And know that you're treasured by our listeners as well. That you're a guest that's always asked for here on Darkness Radio. And
thank you, everybody.
So I wanted to thank you for being with us once again. The Afterlife Frequency is available right now, and you can get it a multiple amount of ways. We have a description, or actually a link in the description of the show to get it. Afterlifefrequency.com is the website. And Mark, you also have a podcast. You want to tell people how people can listen to you every week?
I do. Visit my website, like Tim just said, afterlifefrequency.com. I invite the Army of Darkness, sign up for my newsletter so you'll know about where I'm going to be and what I'm doing. And my show is every Thursday, The Psychic and the Doc on the Transformation Network. My co-host is the amazing Dr. Pat Basili, the street smart spiritualist, behavioral psychologist. And we have a lot of really cool guests on the show. And we also take calls from listeners where I can do a connection with your loved ones in spirit in tandem with Dr. Pat's incredibly uplifting insights. And you can also find out about signing up for a reading with me by visiting afterlifefrequency.com.
And again, if you don't remember afterlifefrequency.com, we've got a link for it in the description of the show. Just click on that link. You can get Mark's books there. You can get the link for the podcast. You can also sign up for readings there as well. Mark, I want to thank you very much for joining us here, my friend.
Thank you, Tim. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to returning to Darkness Radio.
Absolutely. And glad to have you here once again, my friend. I appreciate you. Folks, I want to thank you as well for being with us here for another week. I can't tell you how much I greatly appreciate you being here each and every week for us and listening to the different episodes and continuing to come back. Time is short, time is precious. And in fact, the fact that you sit down and listen to us each and every week and take your precious time out of your day to spend it with us here at Darkness Radio, we greatly appreciate it. For Beer City Bruiser, for Mally Fox, for Jessica, for myself, I just want to say thank you for being here with us. Take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, take care of each other, and we'll see you back here next week on the Best in Paranormal Podcasting. This is Darkness Radio.